There is a version of you that you are afraid to become, not because you can't, but because becoming that person would mean admitting that who you are right now was a choice. That's the part no one tells you about change. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics. Today we are going somewhere most self-improvement content is too afraid to go. Not tips, not hacks, not 10 habits of highly effective people. We are going inside, into the psychology of why human beings change, why most of them don't, and what the ancient Stoics understood about transformation that modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm with data. Because here is what I've come to believe after studying Stoic philosophy, neuroscience, and the lives of people who have genuinely, permanently changed themselves. Transformation is not a decision, it is a death. The old self has to die. And most people are too attached to their old identity to let that happen. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. These weren't just philosophers. They were practitioners, men, who forged entirely new versions of themselves under extreme conditions. Slavery, empire, war, loss, and they left behind a roadmap. Today we're following it. Stay with me until the end, because the final insight in this video is the one that changes everything. It's the thing most people miss, and it's the reason most transformations fail before they ever truly begin. Section number 1, the illusion of the fixed self. Let me ask you something. When you look in the mirror, not at your face, but at who you are, do you believe that person can fundamentally change? Or deep down, do you feel like you are more or less fixed? Like your personality, your patterns, your limitations are just you? If you answered yes, you're not alone, and you've been lied to. Psychologists call this the end of history illusion. It was discovered by researchers at Harvard, and here's what they found. When people are asked to reflect on how much they've changed over the past 10 years, they acknowledge significant change, but when asked how much they'll change in the next 10 years, they predict almost none. We always believe we are the finished product, that who we are now is who we fundamentally are. But the Stoics knew better. 2,000 years before that study was published, Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." He wasn't being poetic. He was making a philosophical claim that the self, like everything in nature, is not a noun. It is a verb. It is not a thing you have. It is a process you are in. And Epictetus, who knew something about transformation if anyone did, born a slave, physically disabled, owned by a cruel master who once broke his leg to demonstrate power over him. Epictetus looked up from the ground, leg shattered, and reportedly said, "You will break it." And when it broke, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" That is not a man with a fixed self. That is a man who had undergone something so profound, so total that circumstance no longer reached him. That is transformation, not a new morning routine, not a vision board, a fundamental rewiring of the relationship between the self and the world. So, what actually makes that possible? Section number 2, the architecture of the old self. Before we can understand transformation, we have to understand what we're transforming from. The old self, the one that keeps showing up, even when you swore you'd changed, is not weak. It is not a failure. It is actually a masterpiece of engineering. Your brain, over years of experience, has built extraordinarily efficient neural pathways, patterns of thought, reaction, and behavior that run on near autopilot. Neuroscientists describe this with the phrase, "Neurons that fire together, wire together." Every time you responded to criticism with defensiveness, a wire was reinforced. Every time you avoided a difficult conversation, a wire was reinforced. Every time you numbed discomfort with your phone, with food, with distraction, a wire was reinforced. By the time you reach adulthood, you don't really make most of your decisions. You execute them. The decision was made years ago by a younger version of you trying to survive a world it didn't fully understand yet. Seneca saw this clearly. He wrote, "Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power." But here is the disturbing implication. Most of us don't. Most of us are being run by a self that was essentially programmed in childhood and adolescence. Our fears, our defaults, our comfort zones, They were installed by experiences we may not even consciously remember. And then we wonder why we can't just decide to change and have it stick. Think about the last time you genuinely tried to change something about yourself. Maybe it was your temper. Maybe it was procrastination. Maybe it was a pattern in relationships that you knew was destructive, but couldn't seem to stop. You made the decision. Maybe you even held it for a week, a month. And then, like gravity, you drifted back. Not because you're weak, because you were fighting a system. The old self is not just a habit. It is an identity. And identity is the most powerful force in human psychology. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called identity-based behavior. The research of James Clear and others builds on decades of work showing this. We do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our identity. If you believe, at your core, that you are an anxious person, you will find ways to be anxious even in safe environments. If you believe you are someone who is bad with money, you will unconsciously make decisions that confirm that story. If you believe you are not the kind of person who finishes things, you will find sophisticated, creative ways to not finish things. The old self is stubborn because it is you, or at least, it is who you currently believe yourself to be. And this is where Stoic philosophy becomes genuinely radical, because the Stoics didn't say change your habits. They said something far more demanding. Change your judgments. Epictetus was relentless on this point. In the Enchiridion, his handbook for life, the very first line is, "Some things are in our control and others are not." What is in our control? According to Epictetus, opinion, motivation, desire, aversion. In other words, not what happens to us, but the story we tell about what happens to us, the meaning we assign, the judgment we make. The old self is a collection of judgments. To transform, you must be willing to put those judgments on trial. Section number 3, the moment of rupture, how transformation actually begins. I want to tell you about a pattern that shows up again and again in the lives of people who genuinely transform. There is almost always a moment of rupture, a moment where the gap between who you are and who you know you could be becomes unbearable, where you can no longer look away from it, where the cost of staying the same finally exceeds the cost of changing. For Marcus Aurelius, that rupture came with the weight of empire. He never wanted to be emperor. He was a philosopher forced onto the throne, and he used the meditations as a daily practice of forcing himself to confront his own failures, his own ego, his own fear. Read Meditations carefully and you'll notice something striking. It was never meant to be published. It was a private journal. And in it, Marcus, the most powerful man in the world, writes to himself things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He's not writing that because he had mastered it. He's writing it because he hadn't, because he kept failing at it, because he was in the rupture every single day and choosing every day to not look away. That's what rupture looks like. It's not a clean cinematic breakdown. It's a slow, relentless confrontation with yourself. And modern psychology confirms this pattern. Psychologist James Prochaska's trans-theoretical model of change, one of the most researched frameworks in behavioral psychology, identifies something called the contemplation stage. It's the phase where a person becomes fully aware of the problem and seriously considers changing, but hasn't yet committed. Most people live in this stage for years. They know they need to change. They think about changing. They read articles about changing. They watch videos like this one, but they never make the leap. Why? Because rupture is uncomfortable, and the brain is exquisitely designed to protect you from discomfort. The Stoics had a practice for this. They called it memento mori, remember that you will die. And they paired it with amor fati, love your fate. On the surface, these sound like contradiction, but they're not. Memento mori is the rupture practice. It forces you to confront the finite nature of your time here. It forces you to ask, if I die still being this person with these patterns, these fears, this unlived version of myself, will that have been acceptable? For most people, deeply and honestly confronted, the answer is no. And amor fati is the response to that rupture. Not despair, not self-hatred, but a fierce, almost defiant love of what is, including the painful truth of what you are, as the necessary starting point for what you will become. Seneca wrote, "It is not that I'm brave, it is that I know what matters and what doesn't." Transformation begins not when you decide to improve. It begins when you decide, truly, unflinchingly decide, that you can no longer afford to stay the same. I want to pause here for a second and ask you something, and I genuinely mean this. Drop it in the comments. What is the version of yourself you've been afraid to become? And what do you think has been holding you back? I read every single comment on this channel, and sometimes the most important thing in the transformation process is simply naming it out loud for the first time. Section number 4, the Stoic technology of change. So how do you actually do it? How do you move from rupture to transformation and make it stick? The Stoics developed what I can only describe as a technology of self-change. It's practical, it's daily, and it's backed now by modern cognitive neuroscience. Let me give you the 4 pillars. Pillar 1, the practice of self-examination. Marcus Aurelius didn't just think about becoming better. He wrote it down every day. He examined his actions, not with self-hatred, but with the cool, clear eye of a scientist examining data. Modern psychology calls this metacognition, thinking about your thinking, and research consistently shows it's one of the most powerful tools for behavioral change. The Stoic practice was simple. At the end of each day, ask 3 questions. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short of who I want to be? What will I do differently tomorrow? No drama, no spiral, just honest examination and then release. Tomorrow is a new day, a new chance to execute the values you hold. Seneca described his version of this practice. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. That practice, daily, honest, compassionate examination, is not soft. It is hard. It requires the courage to see yourself clearly. Most people never develop it. Pillar 2, the discipline of desire. Here is one of the most psychologically sophisticated insights in all of Stoic philosophy, and it directly contradicts what most modern self-help tells you. The problem is not that you want too much. The problem is that you want the wrong things. Epictetus taught that human suffering and human stagnation almost always comes from directing our desire toward things outside our control. Other people's opinions, external outcomes, circumstances. Every time you make your emotional state contingent on something outside yourself, you hand your power to that thing. The Stoics called this discipline of desire, the practice of redirecting what you want. Not suppressing desire, but refining it. Instead of wanting to be praised, want to be worthy of praise. Instead of wanting circumstances to change, want the strength to handle circumstances. Instead of wanting to be loved, want to become someone who loves well. This is not passive. This is one of the most active things a human being can do, to intentionally redirect the engine of desire toward what is within your power. Neuroscientifically, this maps onto what researchers call internal locus of control and study. After study shows that people with a strong internal locus of control have better mental health, greater resilience, higher achievement, and more satisfying relationships. The Stoics built that locus of control systematically through daily philosophical practice. Pillar 3, voluntary discomfort. This one will sound strange, but stay with me. The Stoics regularly practiced what they called voluntary hardship. Seneca wrote about periodically wearing rough clothing, eating plain food, sleeping on hard floors, not because he had to, but because he chose to. His reasoning? He wanted to practice the experience of difficulty before it became necessary, so that when it arrived, and it always arrives, he would not be afraid of it. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, so that you can say to yourself, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" Modern psychology has a name for this: stress inoculation. Research shows that controlled, voluntary exposure to difficulty, discomfort, fear, challenge, systematically reduces the power those things have over your behavior. Here's what this looks like in practice. Take cold showers, not because they have magic powers, but because choosing to be uncomfortable on purpose trains your brain that discomfort is not an emergency. Have the difficult conversation you've been avoiding, not when you're forced to, but before you have to. Do the hard creative work when it's easiest to quit, and feel yourself building the identity of someone who finishes things. Every time you voluntarily choose discomfort, you are telling your nervous system, I am in charge here, not my fear. Pillar 4, the long view, subspecie aeternitatis. The final pillar is perhaps the most distinctly Stoic. Marcus Aurelius had a practice he called the view from above. He would mentally zoom out, picturing himself from the perspective of the cosmos, and see his problems, his failures, his small daily dramas from that vast distance. From that perspective, what truly mattered became clear, and what seemed urgent but wasn't dissolved. Modern psychology calls a version of this cognitive diffusion, the ability to see your thoughts as thoughts, rather than as reality. When you are fused with a thought, I am not capable of change, it feels like a fact. It controls your behavior. When you are diffused from it, when you can see it, as a thought your brain is producing, not a truth about reality, you have choice. The Stoic long view is the ultimate diffusion practice. It invites you to ask, in 1 year, will this matter? In 10 years? In 100? And more powerfully, what is the person I want to be in 10 years, and what would that person do right now? Section number 5, the identity shift, where transformation becomes permanent. Here is the insight I promised at the beginning, the one most people miss. Transformation becomes permanent not when you change your behavior. It becomes permanent when you change your story. Your identity is a narrative, a story you tell yourself and others about who you are. And as long as the story stays the same, the behavior will eventually return to match it. This is why willpower alone never works long-term. You can force different behavior for a while, but the identity exerts a gravitational pull, and eventually you snap back. The Stoics understood this, but they called it something different. They called it prohairesis, your capacity for rational choice, the core faculty that makes you you. And they taught that prohairesis is the one thing that can never be taken from you. No circumstance, no trauma, no other person can touch it. It is, in their philosophy, sacred. When Epictetus was enslaved, his prohairesis, his rational, choosing self, remained free. When Marcus Aurelius was exhausted, betrayed, grieving, his prohairesis was what he returned to. Day after day, in those private journal pages. Who am I choosing to be? Not who am I trying to be? Not who do I wish I were? Who am I choosing to be, right now, in this moment, with this circumstance in front of me? That is the question of transformation. And here is how it works psychologically. Every choice you make is a vote for a kind of person. Not a dramatic vote, a quiet one. When you choose honesty in a moment when lying would be easier, you vote. When you choose patience, when irritation is the default, you vote. When you get up after failure and try again, you vote. No single vote determines the election. But over time, the votes accumulate, and the story changes. One day you realize, I am no longer the person who does that. Not because you made a declaration, but because you made 10,000 small choices that rewrote the story. That is Stoic transformation, not an event, a practice, daily, quiet, relentless. Seneca's most famous line, Nusquam esque ubicest, one who is everywhere is nowhere. He was talking about physical travel, but the deeper meaning is this. You cannot transform while scattered. You cannot become someone new while still committed to all the habits, all the stories, all the identities of the person you were. Transformation requires focus, a singular, quiet commitment to the person you are becoming, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. Section number 6, the cost and why it's worth it. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think this channel owes you honesty above everything else. Transformation costs something. The old self, even if it limits you, is comfortable. It is known. It is familiar. The new self is uncertain. Becoming someone different means some relationships will shift. Some people won't understand. Some of the ways you used to belong will no longer fit. That is real. And it is hard. But here is what Marcus Aurelius understood. Writing alone at the edge of empire, exhausted, aging, watching people he loved die. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The discomfort of transformation is not the obstacle. It is the path. Every version of yourself that you have outgrown, every smaller story you leave behind is not a loss. It is proof that you are alive, that you are moving. Epictetus wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." You cannot control how long it takes. You cannot control what you'll have to give up. You cannot control whether people understand. You can only control the quality of your choices today, in this moment, with what you have. And that, as the Stoics would say, is enough, more than enough. So let me leave you with this. Somewhere inside you, there is a version of yourself you haven't fully met yet. Not a perfect version. The Stoics had no interest in perfection, but a truer version, a version that responds rather than reacts, that chooses rather than drifts, that builds something real rather than just surviving. That version of you is not far away. It is not waiting for the right conditions. It is not contingent on circumstances changing. It is one choice away. Not a permanent choice, not a dramatic choice. Just the next choice, made with a little more consciousness, a little more courage, a little more alignment with the person you are determined to become. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations for no one but himself. He never published it. He never received acclaim for it. He simply sat down every night and did the work of becoming who he wanted to be. And 2,000 years later, it is one of the most widely read books in human history, not because he was perfect, but because he was sincere. That sincerity, that quiet, daily, relentless commitment to growth is available to every one of us, right now, today. The question is not whether you can transform. The question is whether you are willing to. If this video moved something in you today, if it gave you even one thing to carry forward, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need these ideas. And subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because this is what we do here. Every single week, we go deep into the philosophy that actually changes lives. Not with empty motivation, but with truth. Drop a comment with this: "I am beginning." That's all. Just those 3 words. Because naming it, even to a stranger on the internet, is the first act of the new story. I'll see you in the next one. Stay awake, stay curious, stay stoic.